Hello, I'm Sue Stockdale, and welcome to episode 139 of the Access to Inspiration podcast. Today I'm joined by Keith Sharpe, and our focus for today is how to become a better version of yourself. Now, given that Keith inhabits the world of high performance, I was curious to learn from him what are some of the principles and habits that he has adopted to get the best from the coaches and the leaders that he works with, who work with great Olympians. And these habits can be relevant for all of us in everyday life. I'm sure you're going to enjoy what he has to say, and as always, you can follow along with the transcription on our website at accesstoinspiration.org. Welcome to the podcast today, Keith Sharpe. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well, and it's lovely to see you.
It's really exciting to have you on the podcast today because since we last met running a co-coaching group together, you're now head of coaching and leadership development at British Cycling. Anybody watching the Olympics this year would no doubt have seen the successes that the cyclists had. So I'm curious to get into this high performance culture and the role of coaching in that, Keith. First, help our listener understand, how did you get on that career journey into high performance sport?
I was one of those people that never knew what they wanted to do at school. So I kind of was on a bit of a treadmill from doing my GCSEs to go to college. And maybe at the end of college, I know what I want to do. And then at the end of uni, maybe I know what I want to do. And then I graduated, deliberately took a really, really low paid job that I didn't like for 6 months to make me think about what I wanted to do. I knew I loved sport. I knew I loved people. And after 5 months, I was like, oh, it's 6 months next month. I need to think about what I need to do. And it literally was as fortunate as opening the paper, because it was in the days when jobs were in newspapers. And I saw this really cool opportunity for a new UK Sports Institute. They were looking to develop a new program to support athletes. So I applied. I was really fortunate to have made the shortlist and got selected. And then I helped set up what is now known as Performance Lifestyle across the UK, where as a sportsman, the one thing that's inevitable in life is that you'll retire. The Performance Lifestyle team help people understand what it is they want to do when they've finished doing what they love. So I had a lovely few years doing that. I then took a bit of a break because I've been supporting people in the high performance world for a few years. And I thought, actually, if I need to challenge myself, I need to test myself in a different environment. So then I stepped out of sport. That's when I met you, Sue, back in those days. And then I worked in Whitehall for a bit, actually, understanding and seeing if my skills that I'd learned in that environment connected. But I really missed the pull of sport. And it was around London 2012 that I got pulled back in, started to support a sport in isolation, and then opportunities started to open up. And I've worked in sport ever since.
As you're describing that journey, Keith, it seems to me that curiosity plays an important role in your career choices.
Curiosity is huge, yeah. I think to not be curious is to be dead. Genuinely, it's massive. I think we know that from kids, right? Kids always ask why. And I think the day that we stop asking that is quite a shame. Even when I think back to my first jobs, when my parents suggested I get a job, I love sport. I was competing every weekend as an athlete, and I really didn't want to do a job because it would be a distraction in my mind from doing what I loved. So I thought, what can I do that's going to be fun and enjoyable? And what am I curious to see how it all works? And I'm greedy as well. So I decided on working in McDonald's. And then I went into a series of other jobs that have always been just interesting and curious to me. And then I'm always looking at things that are making me curious. Most recently, I think it would be the writing on LinkedIn. I've started to post a lot more on LinkedIn, and I've deliberately tried to be more concise with how I write. And LinkedIn is the output platform for that practice.
And what are you learning having taken that experiment and tried it out? Because I do like your posts because they are succinct and they always leave me with a thought in my mind that I take into the day. That's what I'm taking from it. But what are you taking from that experiment?
So initially, I'm practicing being really concise with what I'm trying to say. How can I say what I want to say or convey my message in the best way with as fewer words as possible? I found a course that I went on back in January this year, and the facilitator suggested that the way to practice was to use LinkedIn. So when they said that, post, I think it was for 30 days straight, was the challenge. I'd never used LinkedIn really, and it absolutely filled me with dread. What would people think? What would my community think? Will I have anything to write? Will people read it? Will people care? And so what I'm getting from it is I'm getting the practice, but I've also overcome the panic of wondering what people think and realizing that actually people have really valuing it. And some of the comments and how my audience has grown has been really lovely. And people have been really kind in the way that they've been interacting with me. So the learning for me is the things that often stop us are generally ourselves, aren't they? We worry so much about what might be and what might trip us up, but actually it's ourselves that trip us up the most.
I'm certain, as a coach myself, that principle holds true in the world of coaching as well, Keith. In your day job, how do you help those that you're working with to get out of their own way, to be able to perform at their best?
I think I provide an environment, the space, the questions, and my big ears, which then unlock the ability for people to feel safe enough to go with what they want to do. So they try. And I think that's the biggest thing, isn't it? If people can fail safe and if people can try and they can identify options, lots of things are possible.
So, what is your day job? I'm curious myself to understand what the head of coaching and leadership development does.
So British Cycling's the national federation for cycling in this country. Within that federation, there's the Great Britain cycling team, which has had all the renowned success that you spoke about at the top. My role is head of coaching and leadership development for the Great Britain cycling team. I was primarily brought on board to coach the coaches, to help them grow and be better. We're pushing the athletes every day to be their better version of themselves. And it's fair that the coaches are also the better version of themselves every day. So that's what I was involved in initially. My role's extended to the broader team. So we've got about 100 people in the Great Britain cycling team, staff-wise. And my role is overseeing all of their progressions.
So that sounds like an interesting and no doubt challenging activity. I wonder whether you also have to be a role model yourself. If you are encouraging others to be better, you're taking on that philosophy for yourself too.
I think so. I think being a role model to me is really important, really important. And I think there's a lot of facets in my life that show that, whether it's through some leadership opportunities I had while I was at school, whether it's taking responsibility for the athletic club while I was at university, whether it's more recent in the things that I'm doing in my community or in my outside of work time. I think that role modeling of being vulnerable is really important in the workplace. I think we can't ask people to do things if we're not prepared to do them ourselves. One of my biggest bugbears is that as leaders and as senior leaders, we can often forget that we need to do as well as lead sometimes, and that leadership is the biggest voice. Thinking back to Curiosity, recently we brought the lovely Catherine Mannix into our workplace, and she's written a great book called Listen. And it was all about having tender conversations. And while we've adopted some of her principles, we've renamed the language that suit us. So we often have uncomfortable conversations or clunky conversations now. But if we can increase the level of conversation that people can have, then it's going to help us perform. And the reason I brought Catherine in was she was a palliative care doctor. So in her role as a doctor, if she's able to give really unfortunate news to people at a time when they're probably most vulnerable, we can ask people to work a bit harder or hear the feedback that we've got for them or explain why they might be deselected. So I think there's learning everywhere, isn't there? That's the beauty of life.
Yeah, and that type of conversation, the clunky conversation, as you named it in a business context, where I coach leaders in the business world, is the thing that many leaders shy away from, is the uncertainty. That's where the uncomfortableness often comes from.
I think I've always had a thing, and I'm starting to describe it now as normalness isn't normal, because the more normality we can bring to the environments and workplaces and to human conversations, it's a win for everyone, isn't it? I think we can pretend work is this or high performance is this, but actually we all carry a story. There's always something in the wings that is tripping us up. My parents at the minute have reached the age where they've been fortunate. They've got old enough to get that diagnosis of various stuff that's going to be life limiting, but that then plays out for me and the support that I need to provide for them. Yeah, it's really interesting that we're all carrying a story, and to normalize that rather than to hide away from that is really important. Something that's really cool for us that I'm really proud of in a work situation is a little card that we've created, and it's got 3 words on, basically. I've borrowed the idea from what 3 words, and everyone in our team has got 3 words. So my words are playful, quiet, and fresh. And the reason I've got those 3 words is the questions that I ask people is, how do you feel when you're flying and at your best? Describe that in 1 word. So for me, that's playful. When I'm not at my best, what would people notice about you? For me, it's being quiet. If I'm quiet and I'm humming, that's a real alarm call. And then what helps you get back to your best in 1 word? And that would be for me fresh. So that's fresh air from a run, a ride, a walk with someone, whatever it might be, but it's not being inside. And those three words have really helped shape relationships. They've also helped shape strategy. They've helped shape lots of stuff. Such a simple idea has helped create more normalness within the environment, which is awesome.
I love that. And I'm sure our listener will be experimenting themselves in how they can take that philosophy into their life and their work too. And if you're enjoying this conversation with Keith, then you can help us to keep producing more high quality podcast episodes. Because although this podcast is free to listen to, it's not free to make. And we put our own money into this venture because we want to bring more inspiration to the world. If you click on the Buy Me a Coffee link on the show notes, then you can do that. You can support us, and I can enjoy that coffee when producing other episodes, knowing that you have appreciated the interviews that we broadcast. Now back to Keith. Given that the high performance environment that certainly we see on the television in terms of sport, it's win or lose, all or nothing, how do you then support the coaches to support the athletes to accept failure as well as success?
I'm not sure if you've used the word failure deliberately there to trigger me, but I don't think there is failure. I think there's only learning, and we can do our best and we can choose excellence, and performance is the consequence. So how we navigate every day, we can choose how we want to be, how we want to respond to situations, how we approach situations. And if we choose a certain way, the consequence will be performance, in my mind. How do we deal with failure? We're in a big process at the minute of understanding what the performance is at the Olympics and Paralympics. And the question isn't, did we win or did we fail? It's, what can we learn from this context? What can we understand? We were hoping to do this. This worked on some levels. This didn't work on other levels, but let's understand it. We're not looking to blame or finger point. We're looking to understand so that we can be in a stronger position next time. I think if we think of failure and that self-talk that can have, it can really limit where we want to go and how we want to be as people.
So I'm also wondering, in that sense, Keith, there's consequence. Funding, for example, is one consequence. A team or a sport not doing as well as they hoped. The same in business. Profits are down, people make a loss, redundancies, whatever it is, there's a consequence, which is sometimes, again, what people shy away from or find difficult to handle. When there is an outcome in a sporting context that is not what was hoped for or expected, how do you also help people to bounce back? Because if they've put all of this effort into trying to do their best on a given day, take the Olympics as an example, and it doesn't work out as one had hoped, how do the coaches and how do you help the coaches to support those people who are in that situation?
It's a great question, Sue. I think it relates a lot to this normalness. If someone really close to you that you really love is going through a tough time and it hasn't quite happened or isn't the best scenario, how would you best support them? Would you shout? Would you point fingers and would you isolate? Or would you call them in, support, and potentially even hug and show some affection towards them? You'd probably go down that angle. And exactly that in a work situation for me is giving people the space, listening to people, supporting them, letting them express how they feel and how it was for them. We've had some examples even at the games this year where a coach had done everything they could have done to get to a point of performance, and the performance didn't quite happen. But at that point, the riders were in the race. The coach can't influence that when they're in that situation, but they'd done as much as they could. They'd invested as many years in that preparation. And in that moment, it's looking out for the human as a coach, as well as the riders that are maybe disappointed too. I think not hiding from the fact that disappointment is part of life and we can learn from it and grow. But the worst thing for me, and I think this is the environment that I came into and when I first got the job, was there was a real fear that if you didn't win, you might get the sack. And I remember an incident 3 months into my job where I openly shared a message with the team and said, look, please hit me with feedback. I've been here 3 months. You might love what you've seen. You might hate what you've seen, but give me some feedback to help me know how I'm getting on. I'd really welcome that. And the first message I got back from someone was from a coach. And they said, are you sure we can tell you what we really think? There won't be repercussions. And I was like, there's no repercussions because the only repercussion is that I'm going to learn and hopefully be better serving you. So I think always come from a place of unconditional support high challenge, high support, and it can be a real success.
Such an important learning. Given that you are helping leaders to develop, what are you hoping to develop leaders into? Because these days we often have role models of leaders who are the heroic leaders, the loud leaders, the leaders that are charismatic. And I also think there are other types of leaders, and I'm curious to know what makes a great leader for you, Keith, in terms of what you're developing.
I think it's being authentic. Some leaders may be authentic and be that heroic out front leader. I think understanding that you can lead from any position. Some of my coaches have recently been on a course where they were learning from horses and how to lead, and that might be leading from the front, leading from the side, leading from the back. There's different positions that you can lead in. Leadership isn't a one size fits all model, and working out and understanding what's most authentic for that person in their leadership role is the most important thing. The only slight add-on to that is we generally have two ears and one mouth. And I think the ability to listen over talking is so much more important.
And I'll come back to that importance of listening in a moment or two, Keith. First, I want to just turn our attention to the role of inspiration. Given this is the Access to Inspiration podcast, and one of the things that we want to create is that pool energy so that people feel inspired to want to do something rather than pushed into changing. I'm wondering what role inspiration plays in your work.
Inspiration is that curiosity for me. I really get inspired by high performance. The other day in the office, came out of a meeting room and some of our recent Olympic champions were there, and it's lovely. I'm so privileged to be able to know the people behind the medals. I think that's a really cool thing, and the stories. So high performance inspires me, but it's the people and the potential that people have that inspire me. And I remember Ken Robinson on his TED talk that I think all the world has probably seen, or virtually all the world. He spoke about Shakespeare having an English teacher. And that really resonates with me. I'm just a small boy from a town in Essex that has managed to navigate his way to where I am. We all come from somewhere and we can all go to somewhere. And I think that's the thing, that we've all got that inspiration. So I would really encourage people to trust themselves. I think really embrace curiosity, be playful, understand why, and then also ask people things, ask people for feedback without getting cross when it's maybe not what you want to hear back. And ask people for support as well, because I genuinely think more people are up for supporting you than knocking you down.
And where do you get your inspiration from, Keith? Who inspires you? Or you were mentioning there that a program that your coaches went on and you picked some learning from that. I'm imagining you have to keep at the forefront of developments. I'm just wondering where you get your inspiration from.
I think I'm always looking out for high performance, but I also like to look in non-obvious places. If I wasn't in the Great Britain cycling team, I think I'd look to think, who does high performance well? The Great Britain cycling team. But there's numerous examples where high performance happens and it's invisible. It might be the local food bank. It might be local hairdressers or whatever. It could be a great restaurant showing great customer service. Because for me, inspiration comes from people passionate about what they're doing and doing it really well.
Well, I certainly agree with what you're saying there. Having the privilege to have conversations on this podcast, I love getting to the essence of somebody when their passion shows up in the conversation that we have together. I think that's magic. Turning our attention then, Keith, to the 2 ears and one mouth that you mentioned a moment ago. How do you use that philosophy outside of work?
So about 3 years ago now, I started to volunteer with the Samaritans as a listener. There was a few reasons why I did that. Initially, it's something I learned about maybe 20 years ago, and I'd never had time in my life because of being either traveling or living abroad or just not being based in one place enough of the time to have the time to commit to it. I was always curious. I'd heard that their training and their support was fantastic. So I was interested to see what I could borrow from that environment and put into my work environment. And then thirdly, I feel it's really important to give back to the community that you're in. So I wanted to do something like that. And being able to listen at the end of the phones, not knowing who's going to call up, how we're going to help, and just being an ear for people is a really powerful thing. And you see the rawness, I guess, of the power of listening just in the shifts that I do. It's a really powerful thing to use silence more to help the conversation flow.
You describe your philosophy as I help people and organizations be better tomorrow by supporting them today. And then you talk about continued betterment, kindness wins. Now, you've alluded to kindness, not using that word so far in our conversation today. Why is kindness so important for you and how do you define it?
My definition of kindness, which I'm really open to people challenging, is the willingness to be true. So I think that being that ability to be able to bring your best self and your normal self to environments is really important. So that's quite a vulnerable thing to do. But imagine if it wasn't a vulnerable thing to do and it was just normal. I think that would be awesome. So the willingness to be true is really important. The openness to listen. So rather than going into conversations, and this might be a senior leader in a work capacity, going in with thinking, I know the outcome that I want here, rather than actually going in and thinking, let's listen to what people have got to say. It's a really refreshing way to go into a meeting, not necessarily knowing where we might end up, but because of the power of listening. But listening to the feedback, you might notice something about me today that you think, actually, Keith, if you did this and this, that it would really elevate you and really help you. Brilliant. I'm really open to hearing that. And there was a lovely phrase that someone once told me around harvesting feedback. And I love that phrase, harvest the feedback, because then it allows more to grow. And that's a really cool thing. So the openness to listen, the courage to trust that people are with you and not against you is really important. And I think that comes through in kindness. And then that desire to learn and succeed together is a really important thing, because that power of community really helps go places rather than thinking. Imagine waking up in a world where everyone is against you and you trust no one. No one's being truthful. No one's listening. No one's trusting. No one wants you to succeed. What an environment to be in. Horrible. So the kindness piece is just a nice way of thinking about it. Kindness wins.
Just circling back to something you mentioned earlier, on those 3 cards, you talked about playfulness, you being at your best, you're playful. How would people see that? What are some of the examples when you've been playful at work to encourage learning or just to be playful?
I think bringing perspective into the moment. I'm not from a cycling background. I understand elite performance. Every day that I spend in cycling, I've been with the team now over 6 years. Every day I learn something more. But at the end of the day, it is just pedaling. And for track cycling, it's just pedaling round and round in circles. On one hand, it's so complicated that I will never fully understand it. On the other hand, it's pedaling round and round in circles, going quickly. So it's not taking myself too seriously that helps other people soften. I use humor, I think, to lighten the load sometimes. People might not think I'm funny, but I will use humor and playfulness as a way of helping people learn. If people can learn in environments or on courses where they can have playful exercises or thinking about things from a slightly different angle, then it's all the more beneficial. I think when people are at their best, they're having fun, aren't they, and enjoying, rather than, right, come into this course or this session today and here are the 10 things we need to learn and this is how we're going to do it. Right, pens down. It's not fun. Let's try and embrace and build together and enjoy.
From what you're saying there, Keith, about playfulness, perhaps when we're playful, we're not introducing judgment. And it's the judgment and the self-critic that stops us being at our best.
Yeah, exactly. In my head, we're just kids that are a bit older now. Clearly, with being an adult, there's responsibilities and there's the joy of everyday washing and unloading the dishwasher or washing up or hoovering or all of that fun stuff that we get to do as adults as a privilege. But it's almost my playfulness with the grumpiness of all of those chores and adulthood that has inspired some of my thinking. Like a few years ago, I did a drawing every day. I'm not a drawer. I posted on Instagram every day. It was just a bit of fun. It started out, but I actually learned so much about myself there. The first drawing that I did was just this really awful picture, and underneath it just said another day closer. And that was a phrase that I use with my wife sometimes after a day of drudgery of cleaning and washing and doing all of the fun things that we get to do in life. And it was like, oh, it's another day closer. And that was a little bit terminal in the way that I was thinking, but actually then you reframe it and think another day closer. It's another day closer to the goal that I want to go after, or it's another day closer to what we're aiming to do. It's really cool. There's a perspective to everything, isn't there?
As we're having this conversation, Keith, and I'm really noticing your thoughtfulness with how you respond, you take time to think, or at least that's what I'm imagining you're doing when there's a pause and there's silence. It's almost quite markedly different from some other types of conversations. That space and time to not just jump into the next thing, jump into one's response is quite different. I'm curious to know whether you have developed that capability to slow down, to take time, to think and to be measured. You're almost embodying your essence of your LinkedIn posts, that say something but make it meaningful as opposed to saying a lot and losing the essence of the message?
Yeah, what a question. I can always get better, that's for sure. I can always get better. Our communication matters, doesn't it, I think, and how we communicate matters. So I'm mindful that even on today's conversation with you, I've used a few fillers, and something that I will work with our coaches on is how are we communicating, because how we communicate matters and it makes a difference to performance. So often people will double question. Hi, Sue, how are you? How was your weekend? What did you get up to? Well, as the receiver of that, which question do you answer? If you say what you got up to, you haven't answered how you are. For you, I'd imagine, oh, I climbed this mountain. Okay. Oh, wow, brilliant. How was that? What was that like? And you lose the first question. So being really clear in how you communicate has huge ramifications. So I've really worked hard, I guess, or worked deliberately to communicate. I think the Samaritans work's been awesome in being able to have the time and the space to think, because people are at their lowest, they're calling you when they need you the most, and walking with them is a real gift. But saying the wrong thing, there isn't necessarily a wrong thing to say, but saying something that might not be helpful is not a great thing. I did some work with Toastmasters. I don't know if you know Toastmasters.
I do.
I don't think Toastmasters is used enough in the community of development for people. It's such an awesome way of developing. I went to Toastmasters maybe 15, 20 years ago, a couple of years, and I've sent so many people to it as a consequence, or recommended that they go to it to help develop them speak, how to develop them communicating. The club that I used to go to, you can't walk down a street and get more random people in a room together. But the beauty is that they really want to develop and they've chosen to be there. So Toastmasters, for people that don't know what it is, it's a worldwide global organization that's essentially a public speaking club, and people go to practice to get better. And I've seen people move from literally hiding at the front of the room, not wanting to talk, to being able to stand and deliver keynotes or small conversations in less than 6 weeks. It's really transformational, and that's helped. I guess other things that have done that supported that, Sue, and the irony isn't lost on me that you've asked me how to communicate. Is it deliberate? And I'm waffling on. The other thing was I did a mindful-based stress reduction course to explore how I could bring mindfulness into my coaching. So again, all of these little things probably have impacted how I am today.
It's fascinating to get that insight as to how you've developed that skill, and maybe something for our listener to contemplate themselves. I'm just going to finally turn to the other outside of work activity, because who would have imagined that you would have co-founded a community beer club? What's that all about?
I live in a lovely Yorkshire village, but it's quite a long village off of a road. And there's the pub in the village, like a lot of pubs up and down the country in the UK. When I moved into the village, it wasn't open. So I was new to the village. There was no pub. There's a village hall right next door to my house. And I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get some local brewery to come in, help us with the beer, maybe get a local food truck into the car park, and then we just put it out and see if people come. And fortunately, people have come and they love it. And we do it 4 times a year. And it's brilliant. It's for the community. Any money that we raise goes back into the local community. And it's just brilliant. Really cool.
And you got that to look forward to this weekend, I understand.
Yes, I have got it. And the power of community is even when you make mistakes, the community will support and show you some goodness. So I'm really happy to admit when I don't do things as well as I could do. And I think that's another thing that leaders and people in the business can really learn from, I think, is it's really important to own your mistakes. And I made the mistake in that I've not sourced the license for the temporary event notice for this beer club tomorrow night. So that could be failure. Or it could be, actually, we've got a problem here. What's the options? How do we solve it? And one of the possibilities was I put a note out to some people in the community and said, look, if we can raise this much money by 12 o'clock today, we can push on and we'll have a free bar for everyone because our costs are covered and it's all good. If not, we can delay and we've got some other solutions. But fortunately, within 90 minutes of putting the call out, we've got the money that we need to do to. So it should be fun. It's a slightly different event tomorrow night, but yeah, it'll be good fun.
Sounds like a lovely way to relax 4 times a year and enjoy the sense of community away from the workplace with a different group of people. So if continuous improvement is at core of what's important to you, Keith, what's next for you? What's your next challenge that you're setting yourself?
The writing on LinkedIn is something that I promised myself I would do for a year and then reevaluate after a year. So I currently write every day on LinkedIn. And if any of your followers want to look me up, that's where they can find me. I'm really happy to engage and hear what people thought of even this conversation. I'd be really welcome to feedback on that. The writing on LinkedIn is something I've just about to embark on being a mentor with Samaritans as well. So basically what that means is for new people coming into the volunteering and the listening, that they have a mentor after a first little bit of training. So I will help them get comfortable enough to take calls. We don't put anyone on the calls that isn't comfortable and ready and feeling confident. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to. You know that I've done a lot of mentoring in my time, but it's just a slightly different role in a slightly different environment, which is quite cool. And then in a work sense, there's a really exciting project which I'm not allowed to talk about, but that's coming on board, which will mean that my work is not only benefiting GB cycling team, but it's benefiting some other sports in the UK, which is awesome as well.
Sounds wonderful, and we'll watch this space and see what evolves over time, Keith. Finally, in that inimitable, succinct style that you have, if you were to summarise what you hope a listener will take away from our conversation today, what do you think has been the key message that you want them to leave with?
I'd love them to believe that whatever it is that they're thinking about or hoping that they can do, they can do. Trust yourself. You can do it. You can fluff your feathers and you can give it a go. And if you're not sure, you can always ask someone for some help on that journey to get you kick-started. And that might be a friend, a family member, or a professional coach, or whoever it might be. But yeah, trust yourself, back yourself, and most importantly, seek out stuff that makes you have fun.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Keith. You've made me think as well in our conversation. It's been lovely to reconnect with you again, and I wish you all the best in these endeavours as you continue on. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thanks to Keith for his wisdom and insights today. I'm going to try out that 3 words approach that he mentioned. I also recommend episode 29 in the series, where I spoke to Barry Fudge about the world of high performance in athletics. And you also might enjoy episode 62, where Janine Canham draws parallels about leadership in business and being an endurance athlete. We now have more than 130 episodes, ranging from business and sports to the arts and social change. And you can listen to them all if you head on over to accesstoinspiration.org. Finally, please just share this episode with one other person that you think would appreciate listening to it. That way you can help us to reach new people and to continue changing the world one story at a time. Next week, I'll be speaking to Pamela Bisson from Quebec, who is inspiring young people to become more conscious citizens. I hope you can join us then.